I think the more interesting question there, thank you, Paula, for that, is what are those Tories that don't feel like that actually back Tobias Ellwood? There's like 100 or more of those guys. This is MPs. I couldn't tell you on the wider party. I think there are a big percentage of those that probably quite like the cut of Nigel Farage's jib in many respects. But the MPs, 100 or so MPs, that would rather die than get into bed with reform. And some of their constituents will feel the same. Now, that's significant come an election. Significant not for the Tories, because they would still lose, but significant for reform, because based on that, they probably wouldn't win. Based on the current MPs and their constituents. You take the point. Let's get a word on this story and the other big stories of the day. Robert Taylor, the journalist and broadcaster, back with us. Robert, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
I think you and I have discussed this scenario for a long time now in different forms. The latest, of course, comes courtesy of Robert Jenrick. He was caught in a leaked recording. I take that term very loosely. A leaked recording. He had no idea it was going to leak out, saying he wants to unite the Conservatives and Reform to stop voters. He didn't talk about merging the parties as such, but clearly some kind of pact. I guess the question is, what kind of support does that have across the country? A lot of Reform voters really aren't buying it because they're mostly former Tories. But what about the Conservative Party and their voters? Would they buy it?
Yeah, well, some of them would and some of them wouldn't. I mean, if you talk to Tory voters last time, that small minority of people, I'm afraid, who voted Tory last time, some of them would rather have Keir Starmer than Nigel Farage. Some of them would rather have Ed Davey than Nigel Farage. Yep. Others, as you said in your intro, would just do anything to get Keir Starmer out of Downing Street and would go for a Farage Badenoch pact or whoever's leading the Tory party come 2029. But there's not a natural crossover as there is on the left. So on the left, tactical voting between the Lib Dems, Greens and Labour was a big element of the last election. It's not so easy on the right. And that's the problem for this pact between the two. It doesn't naturally fit as well as it does on the left.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But there is an irredeemable reality, and that is, despite the polls, it would be unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely that Reform UK could just simply form a majority government at the next election, even though those polls, as I mentioned, certainly suggest they're doing rather extraordinary based on the polling, and they've been reasonably consistent across different pollsters. So there's that problem, and that ultimately means that if there isn't any kind of agreement, you simply divide the right-wing vote, and Keir Starmer gets another 5 years in the gig.
And that's why I'm in favour of eventually a pact. No one wants to talk about it right now because Reform reckons it can win on its own. Maybe it feels it can creep up into the early 30s. Badenoch and the Tories think we're the natural party of government. Look at us, for the last 100 years, we formed the government for about 2/3 of that time. Yeah. We can recover, we can do it by ourselves. My feeling is, Ian, and it's difficult to predict the next 4.5 years, but my feeling is that neither of those parties is going to beat the other one up sufficiently well that they're going to win the majority of the right. I think it's going to be very finely balanced. I wouldn't be at all surprised when push comes to shove if we see a Tory Reform alliance of some sort before 2029.
Yeah, I think you're bang on. I can't honestly see any other way. Of course, in the meantime, they've both got to pretend that it's a terrible idea, or revolting, as Nigel Farage called it.
Well, yeah, and for some Reform voters, the idea of voting Tory would be revolting, I'm quite sure. And by the way, it works the other way as well. But if you get to the stage in 2029 where you're thinking, if we get into bed with each other, this is the only way to kick Starmer out of Downing Street, I reckon both sets of supporters will hold their nose and will do it.
But again, there's every chance you would be successful in that pact. If that was your aim, to kick the Labour Party out, then it would, based on trends, polling and likelihood, etc., it would probably happen. But what can't happen is to achieve that result if there's no pact at all. We will watch with interest.
We will indeed, and you're absolutely right. You just split what we would loosely call the right down the middle.
Yeah.
Starmer gets back into Downing Street on maybe even less than a third of the vote. Yeah. Surely Reform and Tory voters don't want that to happen.
Let's move to this story. This is the EU Youth Mobility Scheme. This means that if you are under 30, you can have free movement around Europe. It's reciprocal, so we could go there, they could come here. Rachel Reeves confirmed that discussions are taking place, but she emphasised there will be no return to freedom of movement. I said at the beginning as well, Robert, that this was, I think, something that Rishi Sunak probably would have done as well. It was certainly being discussed. Naturally, people's suspicions start to illuminate. Hang on, what's going on here? We know that Starmer agitated the Brexit result. He did his level best to try and stop it happening, trying to put all sorts of strokes in Parliament, citing all manner of laws. Magna Carta, God knows what else, some he probably invented, I've no idea. It just seemed to go on forever. So we know where his heart is, and Rachel Reeves and the entire Labour front bench. So many, understandably, are seeing this as, hang on a second, this is Starmer taking us back into the EU.
Yeah, and we would trust Rishi Sunak with this because Rishi Sunak was, of course, a Brexiteer. He voted for Brexit. He believed in Brexit. But as you say, we know the reverse is true of Keir Starmer in particular. Yep. He would, if anyone led the movement for a second referendum trying to overturn Brexit, it was, of course, Keir Starmer. So the suspicion has always been with Keir Starmer that there won't be suddenly a second vote now. We're not suddenly going to go in one big leap back into the EU. It will, if you like, be death by 1,000 cuts. And this free movement for young people could be the first of those cuts where you could say, we can see it making sense on its own, but if it leads to lots of other cuts, 999 other cuts, yep, then eventually you're back into the EU, which we specifically voted against, of course, in 2016.
Absolutely spot on. And this one is interesting as well. Spending on disability benefits to soar by 2030 despite cuts. There's a projected rise by over 20 billion. This is just in the next 4.5 years. Despite all the reforms and the cuts and everything Rachel Reeves claimed to do and the stick and the hassle that she's got from disability rights groups, etc., understandably. But there is a forecast that claimant numbers will rise from 5.9 million to 7.9 million in the next 4.5 years. I mean, this is an extraordinary amount. There is higher demand. Incapacity benefit rate is frozen for current claimants and halved for new ones, alongside new employment support schemes. Whatever they want to call it, however they want to change it, however they want to morph it, the numbers are going to go up and the cost is going to go up. That's it.
This is just an epidemic. And we thought that Labour was getting on top of this. We thought that the Department of Work and Pensions, with its cuts, was beginning to get on top of this. And now we discover that even with those cuts, disability benefits and the benefits to keep people out of work, they're too sick to work, it's completely out of control. And by 2030, you can have even more people. I think the figure, did you just say it, Ian, is up to 4 million people projected by 2030 to be too ill to work. These are working age people. This is unsustainable. Where are we going to get the money from to support millions and millions of people who we're writing off as too ill to work? It's got to stop. And
interestingly, anxiety and depression now account for the largest share of personal independence payments. That in itself, for the last financial year, was £3.4 billion. Anxiety and depression. There's a big old chasm between those two words as well, which is where I think we all start to go, hang on a second, somebody's got full-on depression, you know, we all get that. That's a genuine issue that you need help with, and you may be off work and you may be incapacitated in the same way as a physical injury. Nobody disputes that. Anxiety, I think, isn't that called living? Bit of life, and once in a while, no one ever said it's a one-way street of happiness, joy, success and positivity. So anxiety is something we all get a bit of.
Yeah, it sounds terribly harsh, doesn't it? But it does look as though it's just far too easy to be signed off work for, as you say, the normal cut and thrust of human life. And the other thing to say here is that it appears the UK is a bit of an outlier here.
Yep.
These massive shifts upwards in the terms of people getting disability allowances. This is pretty much unique to the UK in the extent that it's happening in the Western world. So what are we doing wrong here? Is it just that British people are more depressed and anxious than other people? I don't believe that. Or is it something to do with our system that encourages people to be signed off work? I'm pretty sure, Ian, it's the latter.
Well, we could argue in favour of the former that Keir Starmer has made people more depressed and anxious. I mean, so maybe it's actually that simple. And, you know, come 2029, it'll be happy days again and we'll all be having street parties.
Well, in which case, in 2029, that 4 million people will come down very rapidly to just a couple of million or maybe just a million. We'll see if that happens.
Spot on. Robert, thank you as ever. Robert Taylor, the journalist and the broadcaster. I've always said this, and I stand by it. I even write a paper and give a lecture on this one if I was asked to do so. I just sense we are in a period of, and it's not that people are genuinely anxious. I mean, some people have anxiety and it's bad and it's crippling. I get it. And there are people who are suffering from clinical depression, and that can be debilitating and in some cases life-ending. I know that's a given, but sometimes you have to keep saying this stuff. But I think there's another group. It's not that people are bone idle in the conventional sense. I don't want to go to work. I just sense we're living in such a challenging time financially. And even when you're in a job where you earn a good wage, I can't be the only person. There's been loads of people listening to this who earn really good money, far more money than I earn, and there'll be lots of people who earn far less than I earn. But those that are at the reasonable top taxpayers who are, you know, earning a really good wage, and I would put myself in that position, when you begin to notice, and it takes longer to feel the pinch. That's the interesting bit. It's kind of like a middle-class trap that you find yourself in. You suddenly go, hang on a sec. What's going on here? Why? I was talking to somebody recently who was talking about the inability to save money. And he was earning a really good wage, really good wage. He's going, I just can't seem to save any money every month. And a lot of it was where he lived. And, you know, he chose to live where he did because it suited him and he could afford to. But then everything around him has gone up. And then you have kids and you discover that kids, you know, don't just go to school and need clothes and food. They have clubs and they get to a certain age where you think, hang on, the school clubs are, you know, it's 40 quid here, 40 quid there, 30 quid for that. Football on a Saturday morning, that's another 50 quid a month. There's a cricket in the side, that's another and suddenly you've got this big old list and it just what are you meant to do? Not send your kids to those clubs because you don't, you know, it's too expensive, but all their mates go to those clubs. So you find yourself in a bit of a cul-de-sac. Nobody's shedding any tears for the people on the top rate of tax, etc. Not expecting, I'm merely pointing out that it's very easy to consider that there's a group of people, there will be squillionaires who are immune from all this stuff. But we're living in a time when the cost of living crisis is very noticeable. Energy bills, water bills, and the like. The cost of getting anything done. You get your car repaired. So is there a magic number out there in Car HQ where everything has to be, you just know, you take it in, it's not going to be less than 250 quid. There's this sort of magic number. How much is that? Oh, it's 250, mate. You know, I had the aircon re-gassed or whatever it's called the other day, £177. Thought it was going to be about 30 quid. I genuinely thought it was like pumping my tyres up. Couldn't believe it. So there's all these things. And I think for some people where they can't see a way, and this is the problem, they can't really see a way of ever improving that. And it's the idea that you're in a position, you're 25 and you think, okay, I'm not earning a terrible wage, I'm not skint, but I'm not wealthy. The problem I have is I'm never going to improve this position. And so what is the point? So yeah, I'm not lazy in the conventional sense. I may be complacent, maybe I'm disillusioned. And the idea of going out to work when nothing is ever going to change has become more than challenging. So I'll go to the doctors, and so I'm kind of genuine, but I'm sort of not clinically genuine, if that makes sense. I think we've got an increasing number of those cases, and I think this country is far more expensive than many other similar economies.